Hello friends, I'm back again. Tonight I'm going to be talking about applying design thinking to money. And my hair is still in a state of disarray somewhat. I haven't had any sort of haircuts or treatments. And it hasn't yet got an Instagram account. As usual, I'm going to wait for just some time for someone to join, so I'm not talking to myself. It's always nice to speak to somebody, at least one person. So in the meantime, I'm also going to share this out to a couple of people on Twitter so that they can join me. Let's see. Join me now to talk about applying design thinking to money. Yes. Right, let's see how well this works. So alright, so we've got someone has joined, which is good. And that gives me a clue and lines me up for actually starting my talk. Hi Emma, hi Monica, hi everyone. I'm going to be talking tonight about applying design thinking to money aspect of business. Now, quick recap on what I've been doing is I've been talking about business design effectively, and so far I've done, hi Monica, hello. So far I've spoken about areas of business which in our model of business are people, systems, innovation, products, money, and growth. Okay, so I've talked about people, I've talked about systems and applying design thinking to systems, I've talked about innovation, I've talked about products, and today I'm talking about money. And maybe it's not necessarily clearly, immediately obvious that money is something that we design for and design around in business, and it's a huge consideration in designing absolutely anything. So rather than me just kind of riffing about this on off top of my head randomly, I've been diligent and so made a little bit of notes for myself so I can just keep on point. So I'll start with the theme, which is value. Okay, I've recently been asked by a friend, Hardy, what is value, right? And value, in the definition of the term or the word value, it's something that has importance, worth, or usefulness. Okay, so value is something useful, it's something important, it's worthwhile, and it's worthwhile to the people that we are looking to serve. And so this term usefulness is extremely important, as you will see down the line, because many of the things nowadays that we're designing or creating as products, previous topic, are not really tangibles. Like, this here I've got some sweets. I know I shouldn't be eating sweets or having sweets, but this is like a tangible thing, and theoretically this tangible thing has some sort of tangible concrete value to it, however small it is. But then when we're talking later on about sort of services and these kind of intangible things, knowing what value, hi Simon, knowing what value those intangibles should have is a big design thinking challenge, okay, and a beautiful thing to be actually thinking through and working out. So value is this something that has importance, worth, or usefulness, okay. And then so I have a confession. I'm going to make a lot of confessions tonight, actually. One of the confessions that I want to make is that longer than 10 years ago, when I finished, well, actually 13 years ago, I keep thinking 10. It's 13 years ago, I wrote a book called Everything's Business, and I never published it. And because I wasn't running my own business, so I thought, who the hell am I to publish a book called Everything's Business when I haven't run my own business? But in that book, I wrote a little sort of mini chapter, which is about real value versus perceived value. And so let's take this notion of value to break it up into what is real value and what's perceived value. So going back to this, the real value of this suite is, let's say, in terms of materials and all those kind of things, the real value of it is, let's say, 10 pence, okay? Because the value of the materials that's gone into it is, let's say, 5 pence, and then there's another 5 pence worth of work that's gone into it and costs and so on. So 10p per suite, that's the real value. But once we apply design to this, if it's a rarity, if it's something of higher perceived value, suddenly the price and the cost of this suite can be as much as 20 pence, 30 pence, almost like whatever the market is willing to bear for the suite. And this is the ultimate reason why we would want to apply design thinking to money or business in general, because we want to drive the value of the product that we are designing, or the service. And so real value is how much this costs to produce, and therefore how much it should cost to sort of consume. Whereas perceived value is, what does the person, the customer that we're serving, how much do they actually perceive this is worth? Now, that perceived value could be lower than it actually costs, the real value. But with design thinking applied, we want to make sure that this is much higher in terms of perceived value than it is in terms of real value. And so, so then we start talking about money. Okay, money is one form of value representation in this world that we live in, and money over the years used to take different types of forms. So people used to trade birds of paradise feathers as money, or one of the oldest forms of money was what's known as tally stick, that came from UK, where there was literally a stick of wood with a certain length that was used as money, and then people would cut that wood off and kind of trade it as smaller units of monetary value. So nowadays money is actually representation of debt, and this is the reason why on the banknotes it says, I promise to pay the bearer the sum of, let's say, £5, which means that the monetary value of the £5 bill is the debt it represents against another collateral like gold and so on. Famously, £1 sterling, which is £1 in UK, used to represent £1 in weight of sterling silver. Nowadays, it represents nothing like it. In fact, for £1 of money, you can't even really buy a fraction of silver. Hi, Joe. Please ask questions if you have questions about money and designing for money. So, over the years, humans have used all sorts of different things for money as representation of money, and really is just another measure for value. But its ultimate measure for value in terms of what businesses ultimately kind of report on and value. Okay, and so And I think there within lies a big omission in terms of what businesses should really value as really valuable thing. And I'll discuss that down the line, so stick around to hear that. And so the important aspect of money of today is that money in itself as cash is what's known as a liquid asset. Okay, so there's a liquid aspect and concept to money, that it flows. There is a notion of cash flow. It's liquid. It's sort of intangible in a sense. And money comes off the back of ideas. There's money in itself is an idea. It's a representation of energy, of something that flows through. That's where the word cash flow comes from. And then money flows between the banks of river. Okay, so river banks. So banks are kind of controlling the flow of money. And so there's a kind of like really beautiful verbal aspect to it. And so money is ultimately the reward most of the time that we get from people for the products that we design, which require innovation, which are a systemic result of applied thinking in a structured way from smart people. And so then you will hear in a lot of discussions about business and so on, you'll start hearing about business models. And for most part, business models are referred to as the actual money bit of the business. So if you go and pitch your business at some sort of investment circle, you will talk about how you want to sell this, sell that. You've got a great team, you've got good structures, etc., etc. And then they say, okay, what's your business model? And what they mean by that most of the time is, how do you make money? What is your pricing structure? How do you monetize? What are the prices? How often do you charge for it? So what I want to specifically discuss today, and this is kind of like the meat of my talk, is different types of business models, which a lot of people often talk to me about this, and can go endlessly into all sorts of in-depth discussions about it. But really, there is only about a handful of different types of ways in which we can charge money from the customer. And so the first one that I think of is you just sell something once. If you sell these sweets, you sell them for most part once, and if the customer likes it, then they'll come back to the shop and they'll buy it again. It's sell once model. The cool thing about it is that it's very kind of transparent aspect of making money. It's like, you want a sweet? Okay, it's 10p. Here you go. Give me the money. That's it. End of story. Quite straightforward, simple. And the reason why I'm discussing these things is because it all plays into the way we design businesses, because it adds to sort of complexity of how things will then later on, build up into this complex system that's tricky to manage, and I'll sort of build this up as I go along. So sell once is a kind of classic thing. Then there is the subscription model, and subscription model is where we ask the customer to pay us on a repeat basis. So instead of them buying something for £1,000, they can subscribe to it over a bunch of months and pay roughly £100 a month, and that subscription model. And you can subscribe people to, on weekly basis, monthly basis, yearly, etc. Or even you can go down to like lower time units. The cool thing about subscription models is that it breaks up bigger sums into smaller chunks, and also gives the customer an ability to bail out of a product or a service. So there's more of a drive from business. If you're selling subscription services, there's more of a drive to keep the customer satisfied, because every month or every week even, they can just go, okay, I'm going to cancel this subscription, and no longer am I really interested in this. going back to sort of sell once, if your price is really high, you're going to have to target really high net worth customers, and selling once to them is going to be pretty tricky. And once you sell to them, it's kind of like you want to have repeat custom, but if you sell to them just once, then you don't really have that sort of relationship which lends itself to kind of regular conversation about money, shall we say. The next business model is freemium, and freemium is where the service itself is free at the face of it, but then the business is looking to monetize off the back of data or information that the business produces. A recent client of mine is going towards unicorn exit at $1 billion off the back of this very model, because they're selling leads to professionals in the industry that are in purchase power positions to buy high net worth, high value products, and so the freemium model, Google uses freemium as well. Freemium can be leveraged all the way up into billions and billions, and it can be powerful, but it requires usually a big audience, a big platform from which you can actually gather a lot of data and insights, and then monetize those data and insights off the back of it. So if you're just having 3 or 4 customers, you're not easily going to generate a successful freemium model off the back of that. And I think freemium often goes hand in hand with advertising backed model, which is sort of similar, but upfront, in advertising backed models, you have this thing of like, come and use our thing, but you should sort of expect to see a bunch of adverts here, and just understand that we are advertising backed. You might see that like a lot of newspapers and magazines have gone to such an extent to advertising backed situation where it's more advertising than content. It used to be maybe like, I don't know, 80-20, 80% content, 20% advertising. Now it's like 80% advertising, 20% content. You really have to look through a magazine to actually find some content to read. So that's an interesting one. I think it goes in hand with freemium somewhat. And then there is pay as you go, which is that like I have a notion of kind of subscribing to a service, but on demand when I want it, rather than it being a monthly thing that's going to kind of come off my account all the time. I'm just going to pay whenever I need, and it's a little bit like sell once, but with repeat kind of baked into it. But then it gets really interesting where we get into sort of franchising and licensing models, where you produce something of intellectual value, and you say to other people, okay, let's you distribute that through your freemium platform, or you distribute that through your model, etc., etc., and I will just take a commission off the back of that, or I'll even own majority of that value and the product or the service itself, but you distribute it for me. And so that's very powerful, but it requires something of high intellectual value, usually in intellectual property. So again, design thinking is hugely important here, because if you want to create something that is highly franchisable and licensable, it better be good and wanted by other people. In terms of franchise businesses, that like have succeeded over the decades, McDonald's is a huge one, obviously, and lots of others like Starbucks and so on. But there's always new ones that come across. There's one in London called PillPal. A friend of mine is building a company called Coco di Mama that's now got 4 or 5 stores in London. It's not quite franchise yet. It's more of a chain itself, but I'm sure he wants to turn it into a franchise down the line. And so with franchise, this kind of designed proposition that can scale up in a consistent way. So one of the things about McDonald's is that the cool thing about McDonald's is that no matter where you go in the world, theoretically you are getting a consistent product of McDonald's. So a Big Mac is the same product everywhere around the world, theoretically at least. And that's sort of the power of the brand as well. But so that franchise talks about, like, okay, here is the intellectual property, and we're going to just kind of replicate it with third parties, while our design ensures that the brand and the value proposition is consistently applied across, and we will get money from the other franchisees and people who've licensed our content or product. Then there's the affiliate scheme, the affiliate model, where again, it's kind of like a bunch of people selling things together and getting commissions for the products that they are promoting for other people. Heidi saying, except that a Big Mac is much smaller in Australia compared to the US, so I've heard. Yeah, and it goes back to kind of prices of the real, I spoke about this earlier on, real value versus perceived value. It probably goes back to prices of real goods as well as expectations of the customers as to what size that meal should be. And in restaurant businesses, if any one of you has ever watched the kind of Gordon Ramsay Kitchen Nightmares, he'll talk about designing the meals, and he will go into depth of this as to how much of each bit of food should be served to both kind of satisfy the customer and have them see the meal as substantial, but actually save the costs in terms of how much product is being used and material. So if you can serve a smaller steak while the customer still feels like that's amazingly huge meal, so you're saving money and you are still satisfying the customer. So you're saving the real value and serving much more perceived value. It's a completely legitimate thing to do. And so going back to affiliate model, affiliate is where I have a product, I get a bunch of you guys to promote it for me, and every time you sell it, you get a commission on it. Great. It works. A lot of network marketing, this whole industry's built around this affiliate model and network promotion. And then the last one that I want to point to is commission, or a middleman business. We talked a lot when I was studying computer science and management that internet was going to disintermediate all these middlemen. The word disintermediate means removing the intermediary, the person in between. So, for example, it's hi Nicole. And so, if for example this happens, like basically a lot of businesses still today are still middlemen. So your Amazon is a middleman platform that enables purchases and sales between random people who are looking to sell their secondhand stuff and other people who are looking to buy that secondhand stuff. So Amazon is taking commission for those sales and sitting there as a middleman with their platform effectively. And a lot of businesses on the internet are middleman businesses, but they themselves require also a strong platform that enables this exchange of value between third parties, so that those third parties actually see the middleman as a valuable asset, so to speak, as opposed to just kind of somebody that's taking a commission there. Typically, middlemen in real world, in physical world, are estate agents, who just middlemen don't have their own product. Middlemen don't have their own product, but they're connecting other two sides usually that are looking to exchange a product of real value. And so we were talking 10, 15 years ago that the age of middleman was finished because the internet is going to connect people right directly. But in reality, getting rid of the middleman is very, very hard. So Google is a middleman between us looking for information and the third party that is serving that information. Without Google, we wouldn't really be able to find much, really, or the search experience would be completely different. So Google then inserts the freemium model into that sort of middle layer, and they can make billions and billions of dollars off the back of seemingly not charging anyone any money. Certainly they're not charging the users, but they have clients who are advertising themselves. And so nowadays in most businesses, especially service businesses, understanding of these different types of business models is sort of advanced knowledge enough already, because most people don't really understand this in the first place. But then as a designer and design thinker, you have to really understand the nuances of what each one of these business models contains in itself in terms of psychological appeal to the person, to the customer, who is actually your target audience. So the reason why I went through all these business models is because I want to make a very strong point here now that if we're saying we're going to sell something to somebody for £10,000 and that person cannot physically afford that money, they might really want the product, but they might not be able to afford to buy it. This is why you see a lot of car companies and car salesmen giving loans to people to be able to afford a car. Most people won't be able to buy a car just on the face of the value of it. They have to go into effectively a subscription model on the loan system to actually be paying off month by month. So there is an example of how the loan system has been designed to enable mass sales of cars, because most people buy cars on loans. So Fraser's asking, what model do we apply to UX Coach? And so the models we're looking at, so I'll get into this now, which is that most businesses blend different models. So the model that we have to approach to corporate clients, where we are going to go and reach out to them and go to their premises to deliver customized, tailored, specific design thinking coaching to them, is a different type of model and price point to what we're looking to offer to people en masse. So if we're looking to target people in a poor country where we believe they could still really benefit from knowing about design thinking, we might look at ways in which we can give that to them for free, and then work out ways in which we can either get someone else to pay for it, the government, let's say, or have it sponsored by a well-meaning corporation that might say, actually, the people who can't afford their food or whatever in a third world country somewhere, instead of us just donating food to them, we could actually get people there to coach them on design thinking, how to design their own life there to survive. And we'd rather pay for that, because then those people will be empowered to survive without the donations, or not so many donations. So this is, it might sound on the face of it like some sort of made up hoo-ha thing, but actually design thinking is consistently being applied and taught and coached in these kind of extreme environments for this particular reason. So we are looking at UX Coach to apply the breadth of this business model range, because we're looking to also produce our own courses that we're looking to franchise and license out to universities, etc., etc. This is one of the reasons why I'm giving this for free to you first, because I'm effectively practicing here, and then I'll refine it and so on. So it's an experiment of a sort, but an experiment that's, I believe, giving you value, and in that process of giving you value will generate more value. So I'll get onto this other thing of what other values there are. So Abdul is saying, what about famous brands making their products smaller in size over time but not changing the price according, like Toblerone, for example? Can you change size or level of service? I a little bit covered this, but what this actually links up to is, like, this theme gets more and more interesting, I think, as we go along, because now we're having to blend all these aspects that I covered so far. So Toblerone is a good example here. I wasn't aware of this, but I can make an inference as to why this happens. The price of cocoa and the core raw materials that make physical goods typically always just goes up in price because of inflation and all these kind of things. So Toblerone, let's say in the past, they might have had a value proposition that was based a little bit on the size of the thing, as well as just sort of the expectation at the time of what this sort of price point versus the size of the chocolate is. Now, over time, what Toblerone would have experienced, and this is actually a very good example, what Toblerone would have experienced is the pressure on prices of raw materials, okay, but also pressure for the price of the end product to be same as before. So they can't just up the price of Toblerone on the end customer so much. So what they would have done is the thing that I spoke about, the chef, Gordon Ramsay, what he would do in the restaurant is, like, small in the size of the product so that you're saving on the materials but keeping the price up here the same. Now, the perceived experience of Toblerone is probably still thereabouts the same. The fact that you've noticed this size decrease is interesting. So then what this does typically to companies is that Toblerone hasn't really changed as a product, to my knowledge, for a long time. Most companies can't get away with that sort of situation where the product is pretty much the same for decades. They have to innovate. So I think that's exactly what Toblerone are going to have to go to, is push back into innovation side of things, which I discussed before. And this is why innovation comes before money, because innovation is there to drive that extra value so that they can say, oh, this new Toblerone we come up with is double the price, but actually you're going to have triple the experience. And so that they can justify the new price, and then maybe they can even still have it smaller size or whatever, but they can justify that value of it. Because really, to be quite honest with you, I've been having Toblerone for a long time in my life, and it's not the first thing that comes to my mind as a thing to buy. There's a lot of other kind of more innovative sweets that have come on the market. So the company, this is classic example of sort of business thinking versus design thinking. Business thinking is typically looking to somehow, and management science looking to somehow, manage the resources and reduce and contain, whereas design thinking is looking to upscale and innovate and create something of higher value. And so that's discussed. I've discussed the designing business models based on people's expectations, and sort of playing into the reality of what a person's context is, and using that as an actual driver for the business model, versus going, we shall charge £100 for this pencil, and that's what we say, and we don't care, that's the value, and so on. So it's like, really, you have to, if this pencil is something that you can only produce for £100 and people can really afford only £5, you have to redesign the pencil to fit it into what people's expectation is, or you have to really justify somehow that this is worth £100. all of that requires design thinking to make it happen. And so the other aspect of all of this is the core thing that makes or breaks businesses is cash flow. I spoke about money being a liquid asset that creates cash flow, and the current runs is a river through river banks that contain the current and hold the current. So cash flow is the core aspect of any business. And so again, with design thinking, we can understand that that, let's say, going back to the car example, if the car costs £50,000 to buy, most people can't afford that straight off on the like sell once model. So they're going to have to go into loan-based subscription model, but that has a huge impact on the cash flow, where the company that's selling the car, instead of having £50,000 up front when they sell, they're going to have 10 years worth of kind of like £1,000 or £500 repayment. That's a hugely different situation for the business that's producing high value goods than just getting that money up front. And this is where the whole kind of money raising and finance raising thing is arisen from, because businesses, to produce the goods, typically are stuck in a situation where it costs money to produce the goods, and then it takes longer time to actually recoup that value back, and this kind of cash flow sluggishness in the meantime creates slow economy and so on. So cash flow is the king, and this is where I say another sort of anecdote of mine. I promised I'm going to tell you a little bit of stories, but a big book that's famous around the world for all this kind of cash flow thinking and finance financial intelligence improvement is Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And I read this way back in the day when most people never even heard of the book, and I was just off the back of a business idea where I wanted to do water bottling in Bosnia, where I'm originally from, and I realized that was way too complicated to do water bottling business in Bosnia because of various kind of limitations of wells and sources of water in Bosnia and so on. So I kind of like concluded after a few months that wasn't a valid business idea in my expectation. So I pivoted to something else, and I thought, okay, I want to do something that's much more kind of licensing based or a franchise kind of thing. So I thought of Rich Dad Poor Dad, and I actually wrote an email to them, a cold email to them. This was way back in something like 2004, and I asked them, look, I want to translate this book into Bosnian language, and I want to then be the person who is behind the Bosnian version of Rich Dad Poor Dad. And I thought there's not like a million years in ever chance of them ever coming back to me. But they actually responded in 2 days, and they said, yeah, we would be very happy to grant you exclusive license to Rich Dad Poor Dad for Bosnia. You just kind of do the whole thing, whatever you need to do to make that happen. And then I started looking at the costs of what it would take to okay, I could translate the book myself. That's time, but I started thinking about, how do I create this book? I have to create partners that are willing to print this, and there's some sort of like licensing thing that I have to go through, and I just didn't know enough at the time about it, so I gave up not knowing instead of actually persisting. If I knew what I know today, I would have gone ahead of that with that, and it would have potentially turned into a really cool business idea. So there's an anecdote, real life. So I could have been a big Rich Dad Poor Dad franchisee. Fraser's asking, does the marketplace always create a price, or with design thinking can companies beat it by creating a new marketplace? If so, can this be sustained, or does the marketplace always win? So this is a huge question. With design thinking, often the time we are looking to create new marketplaces. And so again, this is about leveraging human psychology and understanding the demand and supply. Demand and supply is a huge thing in any marketplace. So as if the demand is huge and supply is low, the prices can go up. And this, you see this actually surge pricing in things like Uber. So when there's loads of people requesting Uber, they will surge price things because, hey, it's just like that. They can afford to do that. And so Hardy's asking whether Rich Dad Poor Dad has been done in Bosnia. I'll check it up. I don't know. I haven't checked that. I was kind of like shelved that once I realized I couldn't make it work. So we are looking always to create marketplaces, and specifically the reasons why companies would look to create marketplaces is for both having the control or sort of big stake in that marketplace, but also leading and theoretically dictating prices that are higher. Because if you create something and design something that's really aspirational, you can set your own aspirational prices that people will be willing to pay. But you have to really think that through. If you want to know about like whether new marketplaces are created, new markets are created, new product ranges are created, you just got to roll back. Like, you know, let's say 50 years ago, there was no such thing as a computer, right? So somebody created a marketplace for a computer, right? They designed that up, and so, you know, and that then became like the, you know, big thing. And even so, things like laptops and desktops have died out, but a new marketplace for iPhones, smartphones, and tablets has arisen. So these things are happening all the time, and they happen through design. So cash flow forecasting, going back to cash flow forecasting is a huge thing to incorporate into our design thinking minds, right? Because a lot of people design products, right? They're really cool, and then you start really drilling and digging into how much that costs to run, to maintain, to keep up, to build, okay? And then you realize it's really huge cost, and so the money just doesn't work. Even though it's a really cool idea, it's not sustainable. And money enables sustainability of business, both for the business itself, the company, but also for the customers, because the last thing the customers want to be doing is dealing with a company that's going to go under very quickly. So I just shared in the group business thinking for business, design thinking for business, in our Facebook group. I shared a piece of article which talks about a lady in China who's competed with Uber, and the reason why that's kind of related to this whole money theme is because in China they've been competing with Uber squarely on the money front. So what happens is, because businesses are raising money all the time, and they're only really willing to both, or able to, raise as much money as they can based on their proposition, but also investors are only willing to go in so much with the money. So there's a whole kind of money wars that are going on in the markets, where businesses are looking to outdo each other just by like how much money they can inject into the customer space to win the customer over. So a lot of like Uber, these kind of promo codes and stuff, Uber will give you lots of free stuff just so you use their thing, but like over a longer period of time this is not sustainable. So they're going to have to redesign their overall model and the sort of the proposition really to make it sustainable. And what's happened in China is that this lady that's managed to raise even more money than Uber, even from Apple and so on, she's kind of just fought the war with Uber on money to a point where Uber have given up and said, we're not willing to sponsor this anymore because it's ridiculous. And now she's got the marketplace to herself with 20 million rides a day. So theoretically that's now going to make the money back off the back of those kind of huge investments that they made up front. But the interesting thing is that they've decided to invest this money directly into the customer to get them to use the product versus actually some sort of advertising thing, which is not really investing into customer. And then, so what I've done over the years with American Express Innovation Labs and HSBC Bank and Lloyds Bank and so on, and now I'm still having a freelance client called Goldex, which interestingly to do with money and so on. Goldex enables spending real gold, physical gold, as money. So they'll give you a card, which is a gold card, literally a gold card, and then you can buy gold through the app, Goldex app, and if and when the price of gold goes up, the app will alert you and say, hey, now you basically made enough money, current fiat currency, gold, dollars or pounds, you made enough on the gold price surge that you can basically buy yourself a beer for free. So that's like one of the propositions from Goldex. And so what that links me into is the payment flows. The payment flows and payment systems that enable and support all these types of business models. So if you're looking to build a business that has online capabilities for subscription and so on, you're going to find it very tricky to set that up with things like PayPal versus some other payment solution provider. And all these payment systems are competing on how useful and usable they are, so that it's easy for developers to integrate them and for businesses to make use of them and service the customer in the best way possible. Again, going back to Uber, and the way that Uber handles payments is that it never really kind of shows you the payment actually taking place, other than sort of when you check your email and you see the receipt, right? That's kind of where they show that. Very clever psychological aspect of kind of taking away that sort of money pain point, which typically people don't like to see their money going out of the account. They like to take the ride, but they don't like to see that they've actually had to pay for it. And Uber makes the whole payment process feel painless, because you never actually see that taking place until it's later on. It's like, oh, I don't really feel the pain anymore. So, and what then businesses are having to do, quite a lot of businesses, they're having these kind of sell once models, but also subscription models and bit of freemium maybe, and so on. So they have to sort of stack these things up. And so designing these kind of combination models is tricky, right? Because then the customers potentially are cannibalizing over, do I go for the freemium option, or do I go for the subscription, or do I just buy one off? It creates confusion, creates potential choice paralysis, creates a sense potentially in the customer that they are going to get hard done by if they opt for, let's say, subscription payment versus one-off annual payment or the freemium thing. And so designing these combination payment models and business models is a tricky challenge in itself. And a lot of, like, one of my previous clients, like I said, was charging for the license to use the platform. Okay, so it's like a webinar platform. So there's a yearly annual license to use the platform. Then there is the price for exporting your content. Once you run a webinar, if you want to export your videos, that costs money, so it's an additional thing. But then all the people who viewed your webinar, you can actually buy them as leads for your product, but it's like pay per lead. So there's already 3 models there that kind of stacked on top of each other. And so when the client is coming in to buy this webinar platform, they're looking at 3 different things that they have to marry up and match up and really work out how this works. And the platform needs to present to them, okay, this is how much you're paying for the usage of the platform, this is how much you're paying for videos, this is how much you're paying for leads, and so on. So it's a huge aspect. And there was another thing around audience, driving audience into the platform. So it's like, if you want 100, 200 people to be viewing your thing, you can actually pay for that as well. So it's like 4 different things there that you could just buy off one thing in one go. And so that requires huge amount of design thinking to make it nice and streamlined. And then there is a huge challenge, therefore, in communicating the value of all of that stuff. Um, so, so Hardy's saying that there is it's interesting, using physical gold as a currency is a dangerous political minefield. Look at Libya and Gaddafi, but let's not talk about it here. That's a huge aspect of these things. Money is very viscerally and emotionally touchy subject for a lot of people, because understanding all the stuff that I spoke about is tricky for me as well. I mean, I can't really explain it properly. I don't feel like I'm explaining this in the best way, but there's a lot to think through. And it's really a question like, is this really worth it, right? all the time. And that's what the customers and users are always in the market for. Is like, is it really worth it? Like right now, you guys are watching this and you're thinking, is this really worth watching? And so going back off the aspect of value, there are other things that are valuable in this world other than money. And, you know, social connections, social capital is hugely valuable. Because at the end of the day, we make money from other people, and just sort of a recommendation can be worth much more than £2. So if I was charging for this video right now, for this live stream for £2, yeah, okay, maybe some of you would pay for that, but you'd feel then, after paying £2, you would feel that, yeah, you paid your £2, okay, there's nothing there. But now if I ask you guys, could you promote this, could you share this, maybe you feel more propensity to share, and that share would be much more valuable to me than £2. So, because I would actually have to otherwise potentially pay money to have you guys share this, etc. So this is kind of like continuous balance to be obtained and created in terms of when to charge money and when to actually bake in some other value creation, valuable aspects into this. And so for like casual gaming markets, in-game currency is a huge thing, which leads me to the final point of this talk, is that the nature of money is changing as we speak. So with things like Bitcoin and branded currencies, and ability for any one of us to start our own currency right now for free, we live today in the world where money and the nature and the design of money itself is changing to such a point that even everything that I've described so far is subject to systemic and underpinning tectonic shifts in the way that the money itself works and is designed. So if you look at differences between Bitcoin and Ethereum as a platform, and Ethers as coins, or Doge coins, or Dash, or Steam, all these things are cryptocurrencies which all have baked into them different social constructs and mining algorithms that create value for those currencies and coins in different ways. And it's hugely tricky and complex to work all this out and really make sense of what's going on. But Bitcoin being a thing that is popular, if you bought Bitcoin a few months ago at £400, right now you'll be sitting on a Bitcoin that's worth £600. So even if you just decide to take Bitcoins, for example, as a business, and you get paid in Bitcoins, you could be, by its very nature, be getting paid in the currency that is gaining so much value in terms of other currencies, right? So there's a huge set of options here to decide on, both in terms of business models, what currencies, what's really valuable, how do we drive that, all on the back of who our customers are, what they want, what they expect, what they value, and how they want to consume the product in terms of literal currency thing. I'm at the end of my talk. I'm happy to take questions for next sort of 5 minutes or so. So please ping other questions. I've tried my best to pick them up as they came along and answer them in some sort of coherent way along. So anyone else, please ask me questions. This notion, I'll just talk a little bit more about the branded currency. The branded currency is something that, for example, we could create our own UX coach coins. So for example, our logo could become a coin, and that coin would have value within the world that we're designing. So if we're designing an online university, that online university would be our sort of world with its own actors and rules and products inside and things to interact with. And within that world, we could be using UX coins. And so the way that would work, for example, is that we would have people buy £10 worth of UX coins and then be able internally to spend them on design thinking goodies, okay, whether they are lessons like this or coaching sessions or some sort of materials that they can download and use in their own workshops, etc. That's kind of how that would work. The cool thing is that then people could start trading those UX coins, and the UX coins could become part of the bigger world in which they are a legitimate currency. Now with cryptocurrencies, we could literally create a UX coin right now that has all the sort of monetary facets baked into it that every other crypto coin certainly has, and we could decide on our own rules how that gains value or drops value, etc. over time. And this is kind of the weird and wonderful world that we live in. And so as design thinkers, we need to be aware of all of this, especially for business, and bear it in mind and really think through, like, what is it that we're designing based on what is going on in the world, and how can we really seriously most leverage all these trends and expectations, new expectations that are happening in the world. So it's an expectation that we have to both manage and work with and really leverage for both, like, making and designing our own businesses, but if we're in the service sector, designing that into our customers' businesses and clients' businesses. So money, tricky subject to a great extent. I think it's getting even trickier with time. And even, I mean, look, just one more wrap-up point, that I've done some panel discussions at Lloyd's Bank around ethical banking and whether that makes sense, etc., etc. And I said that that's the only thing that makes sense. So ethical way of doing business is the only thing that makes sense, because in the long term, that's building the customer, and all businesses want more customers rather than less customers. So the financial industry in itself is being disrupted at the moment by all these cryptocurrencies and different ways and expectations in which people want to both consume and spend their money and exchange value. So the financial industry itself is scratching its head, going, what do we do in terms of changing this underpinning utility platform that enables transactions in other businesses? There's a famous kind of case of a very clever scientist person in China who gets paid 1 Bitcoin an hour. And she is very, very clever and can sort of afford to ask that, and the company that she works for, I can't remember the details now, but they're like, okay, we'll pay you 1 Bitcoin an hour. That's like, she's amassing huge amount of value from what she's doing. But a lot of people getting paid in Bitcoin already, and the cryptocurrencies seemingly are here to stay. It's just the big challenge with them is that a lot of people don't actually understand how they work, just like with the regular currencies. And so this kind of notion of money and what it really is, what it really represents, continues being a very, very complex and convoluted thing. And this is why I think a lot of designers end up producing things and designing things that actually are not sustainable. They're cool products, but they're not sustainable as a business or a part of a bigger business. Money is a crucial aspect of this, and baking it in and taking it into account as part of design thinking is hugely important. So please bear this in mind, and thank you very much for listening. I've very much enjoyed talking about this, and it's an endless sort of subject matter that can go on for a while, but this was my intro on design thinking to money. Thank you very much. Please share with your friends. Bye.